In the arid lands of northern Nigeria, under the vast sky of sun-baked earth, there lived a young girl named Amina. She was an orphan, left to the mercy of her stepmother, Hawa, after the death of her father. Hawa was a cruel woman, her heart colder than the winds that swept through the desert. She had her own children, and Amina, the poor orphan girl, was nothing more than a servant in her own home. Amina's days were filled with endless chores, washing clothes, sweeping the house, gathering firewood, and cooking meals. While Hawa and her children sat idle, enjoying their lives, Amina worked tirelessly. There were days when Amina didn't eat, simply because there was no food left after her stepmother had fed herself and her children. Sometimes, she would sit on the floor, looking out through the window at the world beyond, wishing for a life that wasn't filled with pain and hardship. Her stepmother was so harsh that Amina wasn't even allowed to leave the house to visit her friends. The only time she was allowed out was to fetch water from the well. And even then, it was a task fraught with cruelty. On this particular day, Hawa was furious with Amina. She had been cleaning the house all morning, and the stepmother found fault with the smallest things. "You lazy girl! You have not done enough today. Go into the forest and fetch me water from the third river," Hawa snapped, her voice laced with venom. "Cross 2 rivers, and get me that water. No one ever survives that journey. It's an evil forest, and you will never come back alive, but if you want to die, then go ahead." Amina's heart sank, but she knew there was no choice. If she refused, Hawa would beat her mercilessly, and perhaps even throw her out of the house. With a heavy heart and a sigh of resignation, Amina nodded. She gathered her small belongings, and with nothing but her courage and a sliver of hope, she set off on the dangerous journey to the evil forest. As she walked through the dry paths, the hot sun beat down on her, and the wind whipped her dusty face. The village behind her seemed far away, and the forest ahead seemed even more foreboding, but Amina had no choice. She needed to get the water, or she would never hear the end of her stepmother's wrath. Her journey led her to the first river, where the water was shallow but fast-flowing. She crossed it without difficulty. The second river was deeper, and the current was stronger, but with her steady determination, Amina managed to cross it as well. By the time she reached the entrance of the evil forest, it was already late in the day. The sky had turned a shade of deep purple, and shadows danced between the trees. Amina hesitated for a moment, but then, gathering all the strength she had left, she stepped into the forest. The trees towered over her, their branches twisted and gnarled like old, forgotten hands reaching for the sky. She had heard the stories of people who entered this forest, never to return. But Amina was not like them. She wasn't afraid of ghosts or spirits. She had a mission to complete, and that gave her strength. As she walked deeper into the forest, the sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Suddenly, a figure appeared before her, a young, handsome man, his dark eyes filled with curiosity. He was dressed in a simple robe, his features striking and calm. "Why are you in this evil forest, little one?" he asked in a soft voice, his gaze gentle. Amina was taken aback but quickly answered. "I was sent here by my stepmother to fetch water from the third river," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I know it's dangerous, but I have no choice." The man looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You are brave, but this forest is not kind. It will not let you pass without a fight, but if you are determined, I will walk with you." The man's presence seemed to give Amina a sense of calm, and together they walked toward the third river. The forest around them seemed alive, as if watching their every move. As they reached the river, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking in the wind. But just as Amina bent down to fill her water jug, the air around them thickened. Strange, wailing spirits emerged from the trees, their pale faces twisted in anger. Amina froze in fear. The spirits hissed and swirled around them, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. But just as quickly as the spirits appeared, they stopped. Amina felt a warm sensation spread through her, and suddenly, the image of her mother appeared before her. The spirit of her mother, who had passed away many years ago, stood beside her, glowing with an ethereal light. "Don't be afraid, my daughter," the spirit of her mother whispered. "I will protect you." With a gentle push, the spirits parted, and Amina was able to fill her jug with the water. The man beside her looked amazed, his eyes wide as he watched the spirits retreat. "You are blessed," he said softly. "You have a strength that many do not." With the water in hand, Amina began her journey back home, her heart lighter than before. But as she walked, she overheard voices from the village. News was spreading that the prince of the land had returned after many years of absence. He had gone away as a child, and no one knew what had happened to him. Now that he had returned, the king had announced a competition for him to choose a wife. The only condition: the girl who could tell him his name would be his bride. Amina couldn't believe her ears. She had heard the stories of the prince, but never in her wildest dreams did she think that she would be involved in such a competition. Her friends from the village urged her to try her luck, but Amina, exhausted from the journey, wasn't sure if she could. She was covered in dirt, tired, and had no time to waste. Her stepmother's words echoed in her mind. If she didn't return with the water, there would be consequences. But her friends, persistent as ever, dragged her to the palace. As they entered the grand gates, Amina's heart raced. Inside, she saw her stepsisters, Zainab and Fatima, crying. They had been rejected by the prince, just like the others. When they saw Amina, their faces froze in disbelief. They thought she was dead, lost in the evil forest. They couldn't fathom how she had returned, alive. "What are you doing here?" they asked, their voices laced with ridicule. "You're just an orphan. How can you compete with us?" Amina smiled softly but didn't respond. She stepped forward, determined to try her luck. She approached the door where the prince awaited. The door was shut tight, and from inside, a voice called out. "Who is there?" the prince asked, his voice deep and commanding. Amina stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice was familiar. She knew that voice. It was the man she had met in the forest. She answered quietly, "I am Amina." The prince's voice replied, "I have heard your name. Now, tell me, what is my name?" Without hesitation, Amina answered, "Your name is Daskindaridi." The door swung open, and the prince stood before her, his face filled with awe. "Come in, Amina," he said. "You are the one I have been waiting for." Everyone in the room was stunned. Amina's stepsisters ran back to their mother in disbelief, their faces pale with shock. They had thought she was dead, but now, Amina stood before the prince, a future queen. Hawa, their mother, arrived at the palace, and upon seeing Amina, she fainted. The truth had been revealed. But as Amina stood before the prince, her heart raced with both joy and fear. What would happen next? Would her life truly change, or was this just the beginning of another challenge? As the last echoes of Amina's name rang out through the grand palace, the tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Her stepsisters, Zainab and Fatima, stood frozen in shock. How was this possible? They had been certain that Amina was lost forever in the evil forest. They had even spoken among themselves, thinking that no one could survive that forest, especially someone as fragile as Amina. But there she was standing before them, her face darted from the journey, yet her eyes shining with a confidence they could not fathom. She had dared to return from the forest alive, and now, before the prince, she had revealed his name, Daskindaridi. The prince, a handsome and dignified young man, stepped forward with a broad smile on his face. The air around him seemed to shift, and there was something majestic in his presence that made Amina feel like she had been swept into a world that she could hardly believe was hers. But it was. It was hers, and it was her moment. "Come, Amina," the prince said softly, his eyes filled with admiration. "You are the one, you are the only one who dared to defy the odds. I have waited for you." The entire court was in stunned silence. Even King Malami, his father, watched with an unspoken awe. His son, the prince, who had been gone for so long and had never spoken of his future bride, now stood before Amina, his heart set. The prophecy that had surrounded the prince's return was clear now. It was not about beauty, wealth, or status. It was about strength, bravery, and the courage to face the unimaginable. The king, still in shock, rose from his throne and looked at his son. Daskindaridi, do you know what this means? This is more than just the name. It is a symbol of strength, of survival. You have found her, my son. The one who possesses the courage to walk into the jaws of death and return victorious. Daskindaridi nodded, his gaze never leaving Amina's. She is the one, she is the woman who will rule by my side. The air was thick with tension. Zainab and Fatima, having been rejected by the prince for days, stood there, humiliated. They had mocked Amina when they thought she was lost forever. They had laughed at her, assuming she was unworthy of such a competition. But now, standing before the prince, they could only watch in disbelief as their stepsister, whom they had treated like that, was chosen to be the future queen. Amina felt their eyes on her. She could sense their resentment and envy, but she chose not to dwell on it. She had been through too much to let their jealousy break her. This was her moment, and she would savor it. However, just as the prince moved to embrace her, Hawa, Amina's stepmother, burst into the room. Her face was pale, and her eyes wide with shock. She had been hearing the rumors, but seeing her stepdaughter standing there, alive and well, was too much to bear. Hawa had convinced herself that Amina had perished in the forest. She had even begun to think that Amina's disappearance might be the end of her troubles. But now, Amina was here, alive, glowing, and standing in the very palace Hawa could only dream of. This cannot be. Hawa shouted, her voice shaking. She is just a poor orphan. She should not be here. Her eyes flickered from Amina to the prince. She does not belong in this palace. She is nothing but a servant girl who belongs to the dirt. The entire room fell silent. The prince's face darkened, and his gaze turned cold. No one, not even you, can speak to Amina like that, he said, his voice heavy with authority. She is the bravest woman I have ever met. Her strength and courage have proven that she is worthy of a place by my side. You, on the other hand, have proven nothing but cruelty and malice. The king, his face stern, looked at Hawa with disapproval. You have mistreated this girl for years, then now she stands before you, chosen by my son. How dare you belittle her in front of everyone? You will leave this palace at once. Hawa's face turned bright red. The realization that everything she had worked for, her hold over Amina, her hopes of controlling her future, was slipping through her fingers hit her like a tidal wave. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She looked at Zainab and Fatima, who were still in shock, their mouths hanging open. They had never expected such a turn of events. With a final glare at Amina, Hawa turned and left the palace, defeated. The prince turned back to Amina, his expression softening. You are truly something special, he said. You have faced so much, and yet here you stand, not as a victim but as a queen. I have been waiting for a woman like you, someone who embodies strength and resilience. Amina's heart swelled with emotion. She had been through so much, treated like that by her stepmother, starved and beaten, forced to endure hardships no child should ever face, but none of that mattered now. She had proved herself, and she had come out stronger for it, and now she was standing before a prince who saw her for who she truly was, a woman of strength, courage, and grace. As the days passed, the entire kingdom buzzed with excitement over the news of the prince's return and his decision to marry Amina. The people of the kingdom, who had once known her as the orphan girl who struggled under her stepmother's cruelty, now saw her as the future queen. Amina's life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. She had gone from a girl who barely had enough to eat to a woman who would soon rule by the prince's side. The wedding day arrived, and the kingdom was alive with celebration. The streets were lined with vibrant cloths and flowers, and the air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter. Amina, now dressed in the most beautiful garments she had ever seen, stood by Daskindaridi's side. Her heart raced with excitement, but it was not fear. She had faced too many challenges, too many obstacles, to feel anything but joy on this day. The ceremony was grand, filled with pomp and circumstance. The king and queen sat at the front, beaming with pride as their son married the woman who had shown the world what true strength was. As the vows were exchanged, Amina's heart swelled with love for the prince, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. After the ceremony, the people of the kingdom cheered, and the celebrations lasted late into the night. Amina danced with the prince, her heart light and free. She had found her place in the world, and it was not just as a servant girl or an orphan. She was a queen, loved and respected by all. In the days that followed, Amina and Daskindaridi ruled the kingdom with wisdom and compassion. They worked together to bring prosperity to the land, ensuring that the poor were cared for and that justice was served to all. Amina's strength and courage inspired the people, and she became known far and wide as a queen who had defied the odds and come out victorious. Zainab and Fatima, still in disbelief over the turn of events, left the palace in shame. They had been given everything: luxury, comfort, and status, yet they had failed to recognize the power of kindness, strength, and humility. They were left to live with the bitter knowledge that their cruelty had cost them everything. As the years went by, Amina's story became a legend in the kingdom. She was a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the unyielding power of the human spirit. People came from far and wide to hear her story, to learn from her journey, and to see the kingdom she and Daskindaridi had built together. And so, Amina lived a life of happiness and fulfillment, knowing that no matter how dark the days had been, she had never lost her light. She had triumphed over the cruelty of her stepmother, the dangers of the evil forest, and the trials of life itself. She had found her true purpose, and with the prince by her side, she had built a future filled with love, compassion, and justice. The story of Amina teaches us that no matter how dire our circumstances may seem, we must never lose hope. Strength is not just about physical power but the resilience of the heart. Kindness, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what is right can lead us to unexpected victories. Amina's journey shows that even in the darkest times, there is always light at the end of the tunnel if we remain true to ourselves. Enjoyed the journey with Amina? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And stay tuned for the next chapter of our incredible story.